All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm David Wood from the Pacific Science Center, and I'm going to be your host for tonight's STEM virtual wine tasting event. Thank you for joining us. Before we start getting nerdy about the science of winemaking, I'd like to share a few bits of information with everybody first. First of all, let me say a big thank you to 11 Winery for partnering with us. 11 Winery are generously donating $8 to the Pacific Science Center for each wine pack purchased for tonight's event. So thank you to 11 Winery and thank you to everybody who purchased those wines. If you've not got them, don't worry, you'll still enjoy this. Drink along with whatever you've got, but make sure that you pick up some wine from 11 Winery for the weekend. Tonight's event is sponsored thanks to the generous support of First Tech Federal Credit Union. First Tech is committed to supporting the next generation of leaders, thinkers, and innovators, and has a long-time standing partnership with PacSci. Their support has made events like this, plus a number of other PacSci experiences possible. That includes The Hive, where startups in residence showcase their latest innovations, and What is Reality, which is an evolving experiences that highlight immersive technologies. So thank you to everyone at First Tech and to all of the First Tech members for your commitment to education, research, and innovation. To learn more, head to firsttechfed.com. Educational programming like this is also made possible in part thanks to the generous support of donors. In the face of challenges like COVID-19 and climate change, science and an informed public are absolutely essential. So if you're able to, and as part of tonight's event, we suggest a $10 donation to help us ensure that curiosity never closes. For more information about donating to the Pacific Science Center, visit pacsci.org/support. Another thank you has to go out to all of the PacSci members who are tuning in tonight. If you're not already a member, I recommend our Fusion memberships, and that's because they're designed especially for adults. With that membership, perks include free admission to our IMAX documentaries, our world-class laser shows, our superb Science in the City talks, as well as passes to our 21 plus events like happy hours and brewology. And we look forward to doing those in person when it's safe to do so. You also get discounts at our cafe and our gift shop. And whichever package you choose, all of our membership options support PacSci's mission to expand access to science education in Seattle and beyond. So to become a member or to explore those membership options, visit pacsci.org/membership. All right, on to tonight's event. We're going to be letting our inner wine connoisseurs shine as we explore how the old fermented grape beverage is made and the science that goes into its production. So who better to lead our exploration of the winemaking process than our friends from local winery, 11 Winery. 11 Winery is an award-winning winery based across the pond in Bainbridge Island, Washington, and was founded back in 2003. They've been voted best in Bainbridge in the best wine list, the best wine tasting, and the best locally made wine category. So they're certainly a fan favorite in Bainbridge Island. And even beyond, in fact, the 2018 Ratio Rosso that we'll be tasting today won the silver medal in the 2020 Savor Northwest Wine Competition. So we're certainly looking forward to tucking into that one. But we're obviously in very capable hands and we look forward to tonight's event. But before we do, I'd like to remind everybody who's tuning in. First of all, thank you everybody who's been joining us and spending the time to connect with us and these experts this evening. If you have questions, comments, you want to let us know how you're feeling, where you're tuning in from, we want to hear from you. We want to connect with you. We want to connect your thoughts and questions and your insights with our experts today. So again, we want to connect with you, leave all of those questions and comments in the YouTube comment section. We look forward to hearing from you. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our friends from 11 Winery. They are Stephen Schreck, Natalia, and Forrest. The three of you, welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
What an incredible intro.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, David, we'd like to thank you and PacSci for inviting us this evening. We really appreciate all the work you guys do over there. And yeah, we're looking forward to discussing the science of winemaking and the fun that comes along with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and start our PowerPoint here.
Ooh, you're ready for some wine tasting.
I know, I'm moving it to the sofa. I'm going to make myself comfortable if that's all right.
Hey, that's what you should be doing. So we're ready for it.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Okay, yeah, so everybody, thanks for joining us here on this virtual happy hour. We're 11 Winery on Bainbridge Island, just a quick skip and a hop away on the ferry. And Natalia here is going to give us a little overview of 11 Winery.
Yeah, well, it's just 35 minutes of a ferry ride to be exact. So it's pretty quick and easy to get here. So we are on Bainbridge Island, and our owner and winemaker, Matt Albee, actually started making wine for about 20 years ago and has been making wine for about 14 years on Bainbridge Island itself. 11 actually stands for the amount of teeth on the lowest gear of a racing bike. So Matt was a professional cyclist before he had started making wine, and he would always finish his races on that the highest gear, the smallest gear, and would always give it his all in his races and wanted to give it his all in his winemaking. And he believes with the winemaking process, he wants to keep it simple, but also keep it science, and knows that wine is all about fun and just finding something that tastes great.
Right on. That was an excellent overview. Winery. Yeah, you can actually see Matt here in this photo. That's in our warehouse area there, and it's pretty cool because we actually do 2 batches of bottling types. One is a small batch where we do everything by hand here, and we also do a bottling truck. So we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation as well. But without further ado, let's get to the
most exciting part
of the evening. So for your folks at home, you have 2 bottles. David, you have them there. The Ratio Blanco and the Ratio Rosso. And as you folks may or may not be able to tell from the screen, the 2 of them together create our tandem bike set.
It's a cute little label. It makes a great gift, actually, because it's got both a bike on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I'm actually going to switch over our view here to do a tasting with everybody together. So if you have your white wine in hand, go ahead and give that one a grab, and we'll go ahead and give you guys a moment to open it. And we're going to go over how to do a proper wine tasting, which is always super fun. Honestly, wine's all about fun here, and I'm just going to give you guys a couple tips on how to better enjoy your wine.
Yeah, wine tasting should be for everybody, and a lot of the times there's a stigma, and it's like a snobby thing, but we believe here at least that wine should be for everybody. Wine tasting is a great experience for everyone, and it just really matters if you like it or if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so the first one we're going to do here is the Ratio Blanco.
Is there
Cheers,
guys. Cheers.
Is there any way I should be pouring this? Is there a right or a wrong way to pour wine? I don't think I have the right glasses. Is that going to be okay?
Actually, you're perfect. We're using an all-purpose wine glass right here. It's those bigger wine glasses that you see are for allowing more aeration for reds, but we're using a standard wine glass. And actually, the cool thing about wine glasses, by the way, great question, is they're actually shaped like this to maintain the aromatics. So everybody at home, if you go ahead and give your wine a nice swirl, you can do it in the air or on the counter. What you're actually doing is releasing the aromatics from the wine into the glass. And then all you got to do from there is go ahead and
stick your nose all the way in there.
Mm-hmm. And small pro tip is since smell and taste are so interconnected, you want to leave your mouth open just slightly while smelling the wine.
It really opens it up.
Mouth out of the glass, nose in the glass.
Yeah,
yes,
put your nose in there, your mouth is open. Mouth slightly open. Just kind of helps get all that oxygen in the airflow, which allows you to smell it a lot better.
And another pro tip when you're tasting wine, you want to take a small first sip that will acclimate your mouth wine into the wine, and then you'll be able to experience it more deeply and truly on your second sip.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're sipping, make sure to wash the wine over every part of your mouth lining. The different parts of our mouth linings, from cheek to tongue, they all have different receptors. And so as you're doing that, you're actually able to highlight different aspects of the wine, as in typically you'll find acidity ranging from the corners of your mouth to your cheek lining. For red wines, the tannins will fall on the tongue. And typically when it comes to sweetness, you generally feel that on your teeth. So when you have a bone dry wine, it's like you can feel the dryness on the bones of your teeth, for instance.
We've got some, we're getting some great comments. We've got Marta says that she's a proud 11 member.
Oh, yay!
Yay,
We're big fans of that. We're big fans of Marta. She said it turns out that she doesn't have the ratio, I think this Ratio Rosso, but she does have some La Donella in her stash. So
Nice.
Is that a comparable wine?
That is because La Donella, even though it has a special nickname from an old monument bike race in Europe, it's actually entirely Sauvignon Blanc, and that makes just under half of the blend for Ratio Blanco.
So the one that we're tasting right now, there's a decent amount of what she's drinking, which is the La Donella or Sauvignon Blanc, which is a part of the ratio in this blend that we're drinking right now.
Excellent. We've also got folks like the connecting labels, and today someone learned that it's okay to put your nose in a wine glass and get a good sniff. So
Yes.
You gotta be careful,
all the way in.
though. You don't want to tip it back and then let it go down your nose. That's never fun.
Yeah. It's always good to have a rag handy, I think.
Oh yeah, so
well
you're so
done.
prepared.
Very much a pro move right there.
So yeah, hopefully everyone at home is enjoying the Ratio Blanco. I think what we'll do next is dive into, maybe kill that last little splash, and we'll dig into the Ratio Rosso.
The one thing I do like about this Ratio Blanco is that because it has 3 different grapes in it, making this blend of Viognier, Sauvignon Blanc, and Pinot Grigio, it's a really awesome blend that's great for everybody. It's a crowd pleaser, but it's also great for everyday wine drinking. It's just an easy bottle to pull out of the fridge and have with anything that you would want a white wine with food wise, or just as a glass on its own. I call it my Wednesday white wine, but I mean, you could also drink it any time of the day if you really like.
And a note from the winemaker as well. One of the inspirations for this blend, particular combination of grapes, is that for us, our Viognier and our Sauv Blanc sit at similar ends of the white wine spectrum, both in their brightness, but also the flavors they produce. So both Viognier and Sauv Blanc produce more citrusy tones, whereas we have a little small splash of Pinot Grigio in this, which is also a nice complement to the wine because it's actually at a different end. It has more of a melon sort of pear flavor tone to it. So it all makes a really nice orchestra in the wine.
I love that word, orchestra.
I do too.
So we recently had a beer tasting event with our friends at Fremont Brewing, and they were saying it may be different for wine and different for beer, but they were getting us to do a kind of windscreen wiper technique to smell. And they're also talking about chewing the beverage and letting it sit in your mouth. How long do you let a beverage like this swill around in your mouth for? Is there a technique?
So it's a kind of up to everybody's discretion, but to tie back into that comment about the aromatics, one of the things about our white wine blend here has a lot of Viognier in it. And Viognier kind of inspired the sniff and taste of white wines. It's extremely aromatic. And so oftentimes in the tasting room, we'll open a bottle and immediately you can smell the aromatics in the air. So it's probably similar in regard of what Fremont Brewing was discussing. But yeah, in terms of tasting the wine, honestly, the longer you like swish it in your mouth and you kind of incorporate a little oxygen, the more you kind of get the complex flavors during that process. So yeah, I mean,
typically what I recommend when you're tasting it, if you sip it and kind of do like a whole, you bubble it in your mouth a little bit, that helps the oxygen get in, at least through your nose and your mouth, because smell and taste they coincide so much when you're tasting something. It really helps find all those flavors. I don't know if you've ever tried to eat or drink something with a stuffy nose, but you're not going to taste it as well as you normally would because you can't smell. So it really helps to bubble it in your mouth, coat your whole mouth with the wine, but bubble it through, let that oxygen flow through. It helps really elevate the taste and the experience of the wine.
Yeah, it's similar to swirling wine in your glass, where you're releasing more if you can have a bit of an airstream going through. So just holding it in your mouth and then breathing in at the same time really increases the experience of the wine as you taste it.
Awesome. Well, I'm ready for some red wine.
Yeah, me too.
I love white wine, but I also really enjoy my reds. So we're going to go ahead and pour the Ratio Rosso here. And for the folks at home, I would encourage you to look at the back of your bottle, because this wine is made of a combination of a couple different things. We have Syrah, Mourvedre, Lemberger, and a touch of white wine, a little bit of Viognier. And I just wanted to touch on something really cool in regards to the Syrah. So Syrah is actually, Washington State is known for it. It's the 5th most produced grape in the state. So this is a Syrah dominant red wine here, but I'm gonna actually let Forrest kind of dive into the cool aspects of what's going on in terms of the commingling of the different varietals.
Right. So it's excellent. It's a great idea to talk about Syrahs in Washington, since, like he says, it's such a popular wine to produce. There's so many different examples of Syrah. But our Syrah is sourced out of a northern point in Yakima Valley, which is Washington's oldest AVA, which we'll get to later. But it was one of our first primary sources of grapes. So here we have dominant Syrah, and the Syrah and Mourvedre mingle very well together, because for our productions, they both typically will produce dark fruit tones like blackberry or cherry. So you see that, and they coordinate really well because of that. But then our winemaker mixes in a little bit of Lemberger, which is much brighter than the other two. So it creates a nice little dissonance to that wine. And so it's helping to really balance out the wine, the Lemberger, all the different fruit tones. But that 1% addition of Viognier, while it might not seem very important, actually adds a lot, a really fine level of detail to this blend. Essentially, the Viognier, like Stephen said, is very aromatic. So it ups the aromatic experience of this wine in this particular blend. But it also brings in a little bit of an extra fruity flavor. So it's just, it's making this a very diverse blend. And part of the reason why it's such a crowd pleaser, a very popular wine here at the winery. Fun.
So when you're coming up with these wine blends and you're mixing different wines, what's the process for coming up with that perfect blend? And what role does curiosity play in that? You guys probably have a lot of fun coming up with these. Is part of it what's just locally available in the case of the Syrah, or how do you come up with these blends?
So that's actually a great question, David, because that's a large part of the fun of being a winemaker. Is it's so stylistic, and so for our particular winemaker, he takes inspirations from traditional sources. He takes a lot of inspiration from the Rhone and Bordeaux regions in France, a little bit of Spanish influence. But as far as what Matt is looking for when he's making his blends is, since wine is finite, you're working with what you have, what came in on the harvest that year, and how much you're going to produce. But he's also looking for what tastes great. He's always getting creative. We actually have a few particular wines that are essentially unheard of that we've started to blend with. We have one that's nicknamed for the She-Devil that's actually mostly Petit Verdot that we blended with the dessert wine and chilled down. So there's a lot of creativity to it. But he also, it's not only what he is enjoying the most, it's what he wants to put out as more or less the sensory experience for his winery. So it's what he wants other people to experience and what he thinks will bring in a broad audience for the most part. So there's, for the most part, to sum it up, it's a lot of stylistic decisions.
Yeah. We actually, the last few weeks, we're doing random blending trials through our own virtual happy hours we were doing. So we would take a lot of our different wines and we would roll a dice and spin a wheel, and we'd decide which wines we'd want to put in a blend, and we would use a graduated cylinder and blend them ourselves just to kind of play around with the different wines and see what would go well together, which is actually a way to actually do some wine making or blending trials at home yourself. It's a fun way to learn.
So how could folks get involved in your virtual happy hours? How can folks participate in that program?
Right. So we're actually planning on doing a couple periodic happy hours into the near future. But what we're actually really excited about is after these virtual happy hours, we decided that we're actually going to do a blending event at the winery in the future. And we're going to take some of our most popular blends that we did during our discovery phase and actually have people blend wines at the winery. So stay tuned for that, because we'll actually be able to do that in person, hopefully within the next couple months.
I mean, you can also watch them on our Instagram or YouTube channel and see past wines if you wanted to actually play along and get some of the wines and blend them yourself. You can always rewatch the videos.
Right on. So for everybody at home, yeah, the Ratio Rosso, kind of just your Swiss Army knife of red wines, goes well with everything. Great by itself. I drink it on the regular, and it's kind of a 11 and
it's a good go-to
island favorite. Yeah.
Your everyday red wine.
Yeah, very versatile.
So we'll dig back into our PowerPoint here.
But feel free to keep drinking wine as we go. It'll make it a lot more fun.
So we're gonna discuss. Let's see. Harvest next.
Got it.
There we go.
There we go.
Actually, before harvest, something really important is our wine growing region. So for folks who are unfamiliar, if you look at the Puget Sound area, or AVA, we're actually producing and bottling all of our wines on Bainbridge Island. But our winemaker takes frequent trips over to the east side of the state, which is actually a desert region. And if you take a quick note of the black arrow that I'm pointing at Yakima Valley, all of our wines are coming from that specific region. And I just wanted to really quick highlight kind of the history of how this area was formed. Back during the end of the last ice age, there was this really crazy event called the Missoula floods. And basically these dams of ice would melt and actually carve out and influence the soils of the Columbia Valley region. So within Washington State, you have extremely diverse growing regions. And the coolest thing about Yakima is there's probably around, actually the most varietals of any other AVA, around 40 for that region. So Washington State is kind of an amazing wine destination as of late.
Well, personally, if you're looking at the map, the orangish yellow color, so Eastern Washington, I refer it to like the Napa Valley of Washington State, so it's a really big, great, amazing, beautiful wine country. But Washington State is actually the second largest wine producer in the United States. And it's grown significantly in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, there was about 150 wineries, and now we're at about over 1,000 wineries with 70 plus varietals that are grown in the state itself. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So yeah, it's kind of a quick overview of the region. And once again, a lot of people ask us when they come to do a tasting, oh, where are the vineyards? And what we tell them is we actually lease the vines over in Yakima. And we'll talk about harvest next and how the winemaker makes many trips during the growing season to determine when's the best time to pick the grapes. So so here we go. So that's Matt there, and he's smelling.
He's our winemaker.
He's our winemaker, and I think he's smelling. That to me, that looks like Cabernet Sauvignon grapes, believe it or not. But we're gonna have Forrest kind of take it away with harvest time since he's actually been there.
So one of the aspects of how I work here at 11 is assisting the winemaking team, which is our winemaker and our assistant winemaker, Eric Strout. So when we're going out there, there is a lot that we can do to work with wines in the winery itself. But this is the most crucial time for Matt and really most winemakers out there, because as far as flavor and qualities of the grapes themselves, there's really nothing you can do to change what you're bringing in. So the timing of the harvest is the one decision that Matt really keys in on. So what he's doing, and he's very excited about it in this picture on the left, but what he'll do is he will go out there, and we have a wide range of blocks from different vineyards throughout Yakima Valley and Red Mountain. And so he'll go out there, and being an old bike racer, he'll take his bike and he will peruse all the vines. He'll take grapes at random because not every stem on the vine will produce the same fruit the same way.
Mhm.
So he'll look at how it's being watered because you really don't want to overwater your vines. And then he'll go out and he'll test the grapes himself. He'll look for the flavors, and then he'll try in the different parts. So he'll try eating the pulp of the fruit, and then he'll test out the skins of the grapes, and then he'll even check out by chewing on the seeds. Even that can tell you a little bit about the grapes. And then he'll just have it as a whole. And then he's from what I've heard, he's a very dedicated winemaker because he'll take frequent trips out there to do this. And then eventually, once he thinks that it's ripe and ready to harvest, he will tell the vineyard owners that it's ready to harvest, and then that's when we start doing some of our lab procedures. So essentially, we can actually take in fruit and test it. There's 30 main qualities we test it for. So the sugar or the Brix units, the TA or tartaric acidity, and the overall pH. So those are 3 of really the only guidelines that Matt has to work with before he knows that it's ready to come in. And so essentially, once he keys that in, he harvests it, and then after that, it's all on us because we try to harvest it early in the morning when it's cool to preserve the grapes, and then we drive it quickly over the mountain pass. For the white wines, we make a quick stop in Woodinville. They have very efficient facilities to press out the juice. So we press out the juice for the white wines, and we bring the juice back to ferment and deal with on our own. Whereas the red wines we'll bring back ourselves and crush the fruit ourselves.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into those aspects too. And what's also really cool is Matt actually, since he's been doing this for so long, he can actually taste the grapes in the vineyards, and with his experience can decide that the way they taste will actually translate into what will be featured in the flavors of the wine. So in one instance, you have what's growing naturally in the field, and then based off of Matt's memory and his ability to recognize these wines and their profiles, he'll kind of have an idea of what that tastes like after the fermentation.
I think it's really neat.
But yeah, David, did you have any questions from the audience or anything you're curious about?
Yeah, we are. So Lexi says Bainbridge is the best wine day trip.
I agree.
I agree with you.
So if someone's they're over on this side of the water and they're headed on the ferry over to Bainbridge Island, what would you recommend for the perfect day on Bainbridge Island? Would the wine pair with any great restaurants? Would a nice little stroll in the woods or by the waterfront be good? What would you recommend for folks looking to have a day in Bainbridge after visiting the winery?
Well, there's a lot of awesome things to do on Bainbridge. It's a really great community, and I mean, weather is very important. So it depends if the sun's out, if you're going to walk along the water, but it's right down from Winslow is where we have 3 or 4 different wineries. 4 wineries located right, or just tasting rooms right on Winslow. So it's about a 5 to 10 minute walk right from the ferry. Super convenient, but you can right from there walk along the waterfront. There's a bunch of cute little shops that you can go in and explore, and a handful of amazing restaurants that you can enjoy food at, and sometimes even bring local wine in as well. But in our tasting room on Winslow Way, if there's something that interests you for doing a wine tasting in person, you're more than welcome to bring whatever food that you would like to have, and just kind of eat and drink as long as you go inside of our tasting room, which is a really fun experience. That way you get to choose exactly what you want to eat that day.
So there's certainly a lot to do in Bainbridge, and
oh yeah,
you can combine all of those interests. Stephen, one question Marta again asks. Earlier you said that Washington is the second highest producer of has the most vineyards, or produces the second most wine in the States. Marta's asking, is California number 1? Who's pipping us? Who do we need to beat?
Yeah, so California is by far the largest producer of wine in the country. I mean, Washington State is number 2, but their acreage in California is obviously massive. That being said, their climate in California is changing. And I've heard that California wine producers are actually starting to put Washington State wines into their bottles. So that's just a rumor. So even though they're number 1 in production, Washington State might be number 1 in quality, and we're catching up to them in certain regards.
I say this every day: Washington State wine is on the come up, and if you are interested in it or into it, you are way ahead of the game.
Yep. So if you're at home and you're drinking wines from 11 Winery, you're ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
You can brag to your friends and your neighbors.
There we go.
Right on. So yeah, let's go ahead and dig into crush. So I'll give a brief overview on what you're seeing here. So basically during harvest time, it's kind of one of those things where as soon as you harvest the grapes and Matt has decided that they're at their perfect form, it's kind of a rush to fermentation. And so what needs to happen is we need to actually take our grapes and crush them. And so we do that in two different ways. And I'm going to play a quick video for you guys on, this is actually, it's a little laggy on your end, but it's the crush of Sauvignon Blanc. And this is happening in Woodinville with a bladder press. And so just to get that for you again, you can actually see all the juice there coming down from just above where the wine is being pressed. And then in the next video, this is actually at our facility on Bainbridge at our winery. This is also one of the crushers. And what you may notice is that the spinning component is removing the grapes from the stems. But what's really awesome is, once again, Forrest is kind of our magic spear here. He's kind of the behind the scenes guy. So he's going to dive into what's actually going on with crush.
So actually, it's really great to highlight this because you're seeing the right end of our destemmer there. So essentially, just to explain the process of what you see in this video, we have these 1.5 ton tanks that we bring fruit back in. And so we tip the tanks up, we dump fruit into our escalator, and it moves the tanks up this kind of almost like a fish ladder device, drops it into the destemmer, separating the stems from the grapes themselves, like Stephen said. And that's actually an interesting choice. Our winemakers are already making choices at this step in the process, because some winemakers will actually leave a percentage of stems in with the fruit, as the stems can either bring in flavors or more tannin. So there's certain components that the stems themselves have. But not every grape is the same. So when we're working with the crusher, depending on which fruit we're bringing in, we're actually adjusting the speed and the intensity of the destemmer, depending on which fruit we want and how much of it we're trying to preserve. So that's a choice that our winemaker makes. And then that tank below the destemmer, that is what our fermenters look like. So we're filling it up with fruit. So it's the skins in there, it's the pulp and the seeds of the grapes. Those all make it into the fermenter. And then we actually, once those are filled up, we bring them in for a day. We cold soak them for a night. And in our process, it's usually the next day or the day after that we're inoculating with yeast to begin the fermentation process. But it's actually interesting to highlight that after a day on the skins, that's when we will saunier some juice away. That's an old French term, just to bleed off some juice. But that's actually how we produce our rosé. Is we use these big, full-bodied red wines, and just a day on the skin soaks up enough color to bring that characteristic rosé color to the bottle. But then we bring them in, we blend them together, and we ferment them down to dryness all on their own, and that's how our rosé is produced. Whereas typically we'll bring the fermenters in, and the red wines will typically spend about 2 weeks fermenting on the skins in order to extract flavor and color, which I think we'll talk about more in just a few minutes. But.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on. So do you, David, or the audience have any questions in regards to crush?
Oh, yeah. This may or may not be related to crush, but we've had a great comment from Marta. We were talking earlier about pairings with Bainbridge Island. Marta says the grocery store next to 11 has a great deli section. Is that?
They do. Yeah, town and country. Yeah. It's fantastic.
This is probably, I spend a lot of time there. It's one of my favorite grocery stores. But my favorite thing about it is that they have an excellent deli section. You can get all the types of charcuterie that you want, and amazing cheeses. They even have sometimes a little pre-made cheese boards, which you can just grab and go. But I really like it because a lot of it's local or organic and really fresh. Any kind of food that you'd want. They even have a wood-fired pizza oven, so that, like, everything that you could want to even drink with wine in itself. you can just do grab and go picnics or bring it into the tasting rooms that you would want to try wine with, which is probably the most incredible thing, that we're just located right next to it. So we're spoiled over here.
If you were going to pair maybe one of tonight's wines with something from the deli next door, what would you go for? What might pair well with one of the wines that we're drinking tonight, maybe?
Well, I want to say that honestly, believe it or not, with Natalia will talk to the Blanco, but with the Ratio Rosso, I love having pizza with it.
Yeah.
Especially like a multi-topping pizza, because like jalapenos or pepperoni, or if you're a vegetarian, that's also great.
Olives are great. The salt's great in that. Yeah.
Yeah, the varieties in the Ratio Rosso kind of pick up well with all the different flavors in a pizza, especially the red sauce. But yeah, Natalia, what would you do with the Blanco?
The thing I like about both of these blends is that they're so versatile and there's so many different grapes in it that it's so easy to find something that would pair well with it. It's less of something, in my opinion, that you have to think about. But for the white wine, a lot of it is great with, honestly, I've done prosciutto, any kinds of cheese. You can do creamy to dry to really some aged, like Parmesan or have you, but pizza's great too. I mean, I think with a blend that's so easily pleasing to most people, I think it really is totally up to you. But I like to stick to the basics, meat, cheese, crackers, maybe some jam here and there, or a pizza, because I live and breathe for pizza.
And I will say, if anyone is going to go down to Town and Country to make this experience authentic, for the Rosso, one pizza in particular I recommend is the Mediterranean pizza. It's a really good pairing with the Rosso. And if you're a meat eater, you can cook up a little bit of chicken to add on top. I've done that myself. But all the pizzas there are really fantastic.
Yeah. But it's really hard to go wrong with food pairings, I think, with these two blends.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so now for the most, in my mind, the most scientific part of the evening, we got fermentation. So as Forrest mentioned earlier, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see what we call an open top fermenter. And believe it or not, there's actually yeast naturally in the vineyards and on the grapes themselves. So before we even bring it into these fermenters here, some of the yeast is already there naturally, but what you're seeing here on the screen is actually super awesome. So with the open top fermenter, with the reds, you can actually see what's happening is as yeast eats the sugar, there's a couple things that are being produced. One of them is alcohol, which comes from the sugar.
Most importantly,
alcohol. You also have CO2 as well, and there's also heat. So the CO2 is actually creating all of these like little micro bubbles underneath the skins, and what's happening is it's pushing the skins to the surface and creating what we call a cap. And in tandem with the skins being pushed to the surface, you're also getting a blanket of CO2 that protects the entire fermentation process. And so that's kind of what you're seeing on the right-hand side is the grapes they haven't really created their full cap yet, but they're being pushed to the surface. And Forrest has some really cool insights as to what's going on the sciencey components of fermentation.
Yeah, so one of the key roles that I have when I'm helping on the production team is to manage the punch downs of these open top fermenters. And so, as Stephen said, that CO2 is helping keep our wine and our grapes safe from spoilage. Between the heat and the lack of oxygen, there's nothing dangerous that can really grow on our wines. And so that's why in the past people would stomp the grapes with their feet, and you could still make wine out of it. And that intense fermentation process is why nothing would come out of that. But that's not what we do. So when I'm doing my punch downs, I have this big metallic tool with a wide, flat, almost like a pizza-shaped base into it. I'm using it to punch down and mix the juice that's eventually going to be turned into wine. I'm mixing the juice over the cap. And so what I'm doing there is washing that wine over even more helps to keep the grapes and the fruit safe from spoilage. But I'm also helping mix the flavors and the color. So that means that all the sugar that the yeast want to eat can be found because I'm mixing it up constantly. But the longer that we spend doing this and the more time that fermentation has on the skins there, that actually extracts more color and flavor from the fruit itself. And so something that I don't think a lot of people know is that fermentation produces both the aromatics and the flavor in wine. So if you're chewing those wine grapes, the wine itself may taste almost entirely different than what you were tasting on just the fruit from the vine itself.
I have a question for you, David. Can you see on the screen on the left-hand picture the difference in color on the grapes that our winemaker is smelling right there?
Yeah, I mean, they look almost golden on the left side there.
What's really cool about this is that, so those are the Viognier grapes, which is a white wine, which is the dominant grape that is in the Ratio Blanco, which is the blend that we are tasting we had tasted or tasting. But what's interesting is typically when you are fermenting white wines, you don't ferment it with the skins because that's what gives it the flavor and the color and the tannin. But are you familiar with orange wine at all?
I am not, no. Please explain.
Yeah, so orange wine, it's actually, I think, one of the coolest things, in my opinion. It's when we take a white wine grape and ferment it in the style of a red wine. So it's fermented with the skins, which gives it more depth and complexity with the color and the taste, but also with the dryness. So it is that white wine grape made in the style of a red wine. So like it's orange wine because the colors range from a light orange to a dark orange. But that's what we're doing here. So that is our Viognier O in the left-hand corner. So we make the Viognier grape in the style of a red wine, which has more flavors of more vanilla and spice and orange peel, just a really more complex white wine that you would maybe more likely have more in, I think, the winter or fall because it's got that red wine style. It's a really intriguing and very flavorful white wine.
Great for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, great. No, that's my Thanksgiving wine every time. That's what I had this year. That was the only wine that I offered for my family. So
yeah, and we biasly picked these two for everybody at home because we have the Viognier featured in the Ratio Blanco and the Ratio Rosso, and that just goes to show how Matt, our winemaker, is so good at incorporating the various varietals and the different winemaking styles. Mm-hmm. And so even though you're tasting Viognier in the white wine blend and the red wine blend in one way, you can come over to the tasting room winery and feature it in a style that it doesn't even remotely taste the same as the ones you're drinking now. So that's just the beauty and the wonder of the science behind winemaking is you can taste one thing and it's made one way with the grapes, and then taste something else and get something completely different.
Made in a handful of different ways. That's what the best thing about wine is.
Yeah, essentially, like every aspect of the world of wine is nearly infinite in all the different combinations. So it is really fascinating.
Yeah, are there any at home new questions, or do you have any new ones for us, David?
We've got one from Susanna, which is actually related to what we've just been discussing with the fermentation process and aromatics. Susanna's asking, I noticed in that picture, certainly on the right, that it looks like it's in a pretty interesting container. But Susanna asks, how does aging in wooden barrels versus other containers affect the chemistry of the wine?
So that's actually a great question, Susanna. So essentially, that is once again a stylistic decision by the winemaker. And so like a great way to highlight this is how we work with our whites and reds here at 11. So almost entirely we ferment and hold our white wines in stainless steel. Stainless steel is known to preserve fruity and floral aromatics and flavors a bit better than wood or stone or cement holding cells would, because that's just the nature of the material. Whereas when you're using wooden barrels, in our case, we use neutral oak barrels. So the oak barrels themselves are not adding much, but what they're doing is they generally tone down those fruity flavors. They almost hide them in a sense. But one way that we, and I'm sure Stephen will elaborate more on this, but one way that we add oaky components to our red wine is through oak stavins. So it's more of a precise form of adding oak to the wine. And what you get from oak can be anything from more tannin to a smoother, rounder, softer mouthfeel to it. It's kind of right in the gray area where you go from the science of winemaking to the magic of winemaking, because there's such a finite conduction going on right there that it's hard to actually measure. But through trials and error, we know that it does produce these effects that we are going for. And of course, there's different types of oak out there. We use both American and French oak stavens at our winery. But yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
David, we've mentioned this a few times. I just want to make sure that at least you know, or our viewers know, but are you familiar with what tannins are?
I will say that I am not, and let us know in the comment section too, if everyone who's participating at home, let us know whether you do or don't know. But no, personally, I do not know. So could you explain that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to dive into this. Tannins are actually, it's that mouthfeel of a wine, typically in reds. It's the dryness that when you drink a red, not necessarily the pucker, but the way it makes the front of your mouth feel. It's super dry. That feeling.
Yeah.
Where it dries out your mouth.
Yeah, it's almost like a grippy sensation. For the most part, I mean, everyone has different receptors. We're all built different on a chemical level, but for tannins, you typically feel that grip on your tongue or just on the edges of your tongue as you drink. So it almost, you have that experience, but almost also gives texture to the wine that you're drinking.
Yeah, texture. The best way I can explain this is I've done this before. I've gone to the grocery store and bought grapes, any kind of grape that you would just enjoy at home. But if you actually take the time to peel the skin off itself and just eat the skin on its own, it actually gives you kind of this way to help better understand where the tannins are coming from. Essentially is from the skin. So if you just eat the skin from a normal everyday grape, you're going to get that dry sensation in your mouth, that texture, which in turn is basically reflecting what happens in the wine that you're drinking, especially reds.
Yeah, and there's actually also tannins in the seeds and in the stems as well. So even though we do destem our grapes, there are pieces that get left into the must and into the fermentation process. And that actually adds another depth of complexity to the flavor of the wine after fermentation is done.
I hope that answers what tannins are.
We're kind of wine nerds. So.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we're doing this. We're learning. So thank you.
Right on. So just a quick brief overview on aromatics. So earlier we talked about how to properly taste a wine, where you want to smell it first. Really quickly, one of the more interesting things about aromatics and tastes in wines, especially if you're in a tasting room, you're at a winery, some people might be like, oh, I taste bitter melon or some exotic fruit or something like that. What's really interesting about wine and aromatics is unless you've had that fruit or that vegetable, you won't actually taste that in the wine unless you have it in your memory.
Yeah.
So your ability to taste and pick up different compounds in a wine is purely based on your experience in your life and the exposure that you've had to various foods.
When I have tasted different foods or smelled different things, like just walking down the street, I can be like, oh, that smells like this. And it's just based off things like, oh, I've tasted a wine where I'm like, that tastes like Christmas. That tastes like Christmas. It could be the spice and complexity that you're getting out of the wine. But I mean, it's so interesting that taste and smell they work so well with your memory. And like, that's something that, I mean, it has such a significant impact on your mind, which will directly reflect the way you respond to a certain kind of wine, whether you like it or not, or what kind of notes you're picking up, because it's so memory based.
Yeah, and in fact, something I encourage in the tasting room often is to use whatever terminology makes the most sense to you, because there are sometimes, like Stephen said, when you have that memory for certain flavor compounds, but if you don't have it, you're experiencing something. So I encourage people to just say whatever comes to their mind. Like one kind of funny memory I have with one of our volunteers was that we were trying to describe certain wines, and one of the most evocative words that they said was, "Oh, this kind of reminds me of like Crayola crayons." And well, necessarily I am not familiar with the taste of Crayola crayons. That definitely that sent my scent and taste memories to a certain point, and so I completely understood what they were trying to say. And so even though we have all these different receptors and all these different memory banks, it is really interesting to see what people come up with, because two people can sip the same wine and have very different experiences, which I'm constantly entertained by, to be honest. But
I mean, what you're going to taste is completely different from what I'm going to taste, because Stephen and I have had completely different experiences. So it's just so circumstantial. So there's no wrong way to taste or smell or evaluate wine.
Right. That's why the big end goal for wine is, are you enjoying it? Would you have it again?
Yeah.
That's why you shouldn't be daunted or intimidated by wine tasting. You should just go and have fun, and then just be honest with yourself whether or not you like what you're having.
The best way to learn something is to practice, and the best way to understand wine is to practice by drinking. So
yep.
There
So
we
drink
go.
lots of wine.
So yeah, how's everybody doing on the audience side? Are they curious about aromatics or anything else we just discussed?
Yeah, no, so far so good. I think it's great that there are multiple entry points that we could, we're all drinking perhaps the same bottle of wine, but depending on your background and your experiences, it might conjure up different memories of different times, as well as bring up different experiences. So no, that's superb. So far, no questions related to aromatics at the moment, but we may get some more when we move on to the Q&A.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about punch downs real briefly here. So Forrest was talking about how during the fermentation process you really have to mix in the skins with the juice,
and that's where he's using this thing with the pizza-sized.
Yeah, this is exactly the punch down tool you see here. This is one of our volunteers experiencing punch downs herself. But basically, if you're looking at the tool closely, you can notice that it has perforations or holes at the bottom, and that's just to aid, because you can actually get a lot of resistance from the cap. The only thing coming up at you is the CO2 gas pressing up the skins, and just the heat that also adds to the intensity of it. And this particular fermenter we have here is our Mourvedre, which is some of the largest berries that we have as compared to any of the other fruit that we have. And so this was one of the hardest caps to press through on that year. I remember it distinctly. But the thing about it is this one in particular, we let stay on the skins for a longer amount of time, because we have a certain Mourvedre that extracts more color and more flavor off the skins, just because the skins take a little bit longer to break down, and because that's the stylistic choice that our winemaker is making with it.
It's a lot of manual labor. These punch downs, it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, that's the thing about winemaking. People have a certain idea of it, but it really is like part puzzle solving, creative problem solving, part workout, and part just fun stylistic choices that you're making, because you're making a really fun product. Like the three of us on the winemaker team, we all have scientific backgrounds, but we know what our goal is, to produce a great wine that many, many people will enjoy. But
and I just want to, I'm a kind of a really big fan of what is known as our signature grape here at 11 Winery, which is our Mourvedre, or Mourvedre, if you will. It's actually one that you're tasting in the Ratio Rosso. And Matt is actually known for Mourvedre. So Mourvedre is actually a Spanish varietal. It's planted around 4,000 years ago in Spain. And so it's been around for a really long time. But most people have never tried it, let alone as a single varietal. And here at 11, we specialize in it. There's actually a white wine that we make out of the Mourvedre, which is pretty much totally unheard of, because it's made from a red grape.
We're one of the few wineries in the world that actually makes a white Mourvedre. So
yeah,
it's really unique. And here's the bottle. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, so pretty crazy to have Mourvedre as a single varietal, let alone as a white wine, and that's kind of what everyone's seeing in that photo there. Those are the Mourvedre grapes. So super big fan of Mourvedre, and
we're here for the offbeat winemaking and the really unique flavors, but that's what makes wine so exciting.
And so we'll kind of dive into pressing here real quick. So what everyone's seeing here, and Forrest, correct me if I'm wrong, is this a basket press?
This is a basket press. By the basket that you see in front of us, we have a metal basket that we hammer in pins to keep it completely tight, because this is one of the most critical processes after fermentation for our winemaking. And what you'll see in our next slide when we get there is that we actually use it's a hydraulic press on the top that brings the pressure down. But it's really interesting here that you see the gravity and the weight of the fruit actually drawing out juice before we've even started to press the wines. And so what we're looking for here is that making sure it's all flowing out smoothly. Actually, because of the intense pressure, we have a special tool that when seeds will jam the perforations on the side of the basket. And so we'll have to block those out because they can actually shoot jets of wine out that we're trying to capture. And so it's one of those steps, one of the things we watch for when we're working the basket press. But
yeah, and what everybody's actually seeing here is what Cabernet, this is the 2019 Cabernet Sauvignon, which is actually still currently aging in barrels, but it's actually pretty funny. I came here to the winery while Forrest was working on pressing out this juice, and you'll see here in this photo what it looks like when the cab comes out of the sides of the press. But this wine is actually already fermented and ready to go. So you can see one of our avid and passionate volunteers here. She just had a little spoon.
Club members.
And
Wow,
club members,
club
yeah.
member.
She has a little spoon there, and I may or may not have had copious amounts of wine before it was even bottled. So
yeah, that's a great point that Stephen actually makes, though, is that if you sample the wine right out of the press, that's one of the freshest points, because this is when, at least for our definitions, this is when it technically becomes wine. And so it's the freshest point. We call it colloquially baby wine, because it's the very beginning of the wine's life cycle after it's been juice and fruit. But
yeah, are there any exciting questions about pressing?
Well, you did mention there that you've got volunteers. Those volunteers, I think probably a lot of people are envious of the job that you do and would love to get involved. How can folks volunteer at 11 Winery, and what are some of the perks?
Yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of the time with our volunteers during winemaking and bottling and crush, we reach out to our club members. So a lot of club members actually decide to come and help and make the wine, and then they get to leave with bottles of the wine that they made themselves, which is a really exciting thing because then you're part of the whole winemaking process.
Yeah, what's the club?
Actually, I love this. We're actually top 20 wine clubs in Washington State. It's free to join. The only thing you end up paying for is 3 bottles quarterly. So, but with that, you get access to being able to help with the bottling or winemaking or crush, but also you get to taste wine for you and 3 friends every day if you want it for free. Yeah, it's we just want everyone in the community or just around to feel like a part of the winemaking experience, because again, we want wine and wine tasting to be for everybody, and that it's not just something for people that actually are wine snobs or wine geeks. You know, it's a whole experience that everybody should have, and so we want it to be accessible to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then this is one of our last slides here. So here at 11, we're considered in the top 15% in the state in terms of wine production. That being said, our total production is around 5,000 cases. And we do a couple different bottling styles. One is where we do everything by hand. So we truly are handcrafted wine, and that really reflects itself in the quality of the wines. And you can taste that in the flagship white wine and red blend that you're drinking today. But for the bigger production bottles, we actually bring in a semi-truck that has an entire bottling processing facility inside. So we actually have our volunteers. And what's really cool is we buy American glass made in Seattle, and that glass is brought onto the island, and we use basically a Seattle company for our glassware. And I'm gonna play a little video here. So our volunteers, they basically take the empty cases, they put the bottles into a conveyor belt, and that conveyor belt works through everything from, we actually take a little bit of nitrogen and spritz the inside of the bottle to remove impurities and contaminants like dust. And then from there, the bottles are filled with wine, and then you can actually see here, the corks are being pushed on to the bottle. And actually, believe it or not, what you're holding in your hand right now, if you're at home, is what we call a diem cork. And here at 11 Winery, we take really close attention to take care of our packaging. So a lot of wineries will actually use plastic caps or other types of containers. we believe in natural, environmentally friendly products. So our corks are 100% natural blended cork that are fused together with a type of honey resin. And so we actually also did away with our tin foils that are purely just decorative. So at 11 Winery, obviously we're into science and everything like that, but we're also really environmentally conscious. So that's actually reflected in the bottling as well.
And one last note, just real fast, I'll say that was a big accomplishment for the winery recently, is we just had the bottling trek in last week. We set a new record for ourselves, and it was only with our red wines. It was the last bottling event of the year, really, well, of the season before we get to August. But we bottled 20,000 bottles in one single day with this automated bottling truck, and that's just how much it helps us really produce and increase our efficiency here at 11. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And,
That's all she wrote.
Yeah, thank you to you guys over at PacSci and for everybody who's watching. We really appreciate it. Kind of a little promo we're doing for everybody is if you email cheers@11winery.com, we will hook you up with a 2-for-1 tasting at 11.
At one of our locations in person.
That's right.
We are in phase 2 on Bainbridge Island, so you can come in and drink with us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, Forrest, and Natalia, for sharing your time and expertise. And thank you everyone who's been tuning in. We're now going to move on to the Q&A. I know we've already been getting some of everyone's comments and questions out there. Real quick, can you just remind everyone one more time about the promotion and what they can do if they email cheers@11winery.com?
Yeah, totally. So if you want to do a tasting either at our tasting room on Winslow off the ferry or at our winery, you can email cheers@11winery.com and we will respond to you so that you're eligible for that 2-for-1 tasting.
Excellent. Give them an email. So everyone who's watching at home, please continue to send us your questions and your comments. We're moving on now to the question and answer portion of tonight's event. I'll go with a couple quick comments. Martha says, Marta's been all over the chat, so thank you, Marta.
We love you.
We love Marta.
I think she thinks that she bottled the bubbles with them in December, presumably those volunteers. So, so thank you, Marta, for volunteering. We got some great questions here, but before I get to those questions that folks have asked from home, you mentioned earlier that Bainbridge Island's in stage 2 of the reopening phase. So how has COVID-19 impacted life and work over at the winery?
Yeah, so here at 11, we're really conscientious of the situation, and we're taking the necessary precautions to keep people safe and keep ourselves safe. So in our tasting room, we're at a limited capacity currently. We're practicing social distancing. And we have a really good airflow with both of our front door and back door open. But really, the best thing about Bainbridge and our winery in particular is if you come to our winery location up on Day Road, now that we are heading into the summer months, our outdoor patio is open. And so we have a lot more space there where it's more comfortable and people can really spread out and just enjoy, close family or friends and not have to worry about a crowded facility. So, at 11, we're sanitizing actually everything with, believe it or not, 190 proof Pinot Grigio.
Just
Wow.
high proof grape spirits. We're spraying down everything with wine, essentially. So we're just keeping it clean.
Yeah, it's nearly pure alcohol derived from grapes. So my favorite part about it is it smells a little bit better than your typical rubbing alcohol. So I'm a big fan of that.
Has anyone been brave enough to give 190 proof alcohol a little taste, or is it not best for consumption?
Well,
next time I do that, I'll get back to you.
Actually, accidentally, that was one thing that I've been affected by COVID is I was wearing my mask and I was sanitizing my hands and I brushed something off my mask and then I was just stuck with that alcohol smell. So I got very close to it. But
I think a little spritz here and there might be interesting to see how that goes.
Might spice up.
You never know.
So keep those questions coming. We've got some great ones. Alan asks, why do you let red wines breathe more than white wines? And what does it do to make the wine taste better?
So oxygen is such a tricky thing when it comes to winemaking, and that's really, that whole breathing factor is what you're asking about, is oxygen. And so essentially that is why oak has always been the wood used for barrels, is because it has a natural propensity to be able to breathe through some fine porous activity. And it's just in that fine line between actually helping the barrel aging process of the wines themselves and the emboldening of the body, because most of the time the body of the wine really develops in the barrel. And you're also getting that effect as soon as wine is oxidized, it's affecting the components within the wine. So when you're having like flavor compounds, anthocyanins, the color, all of that, that is affected by oxygen. And so the oxygen for the red wines in the barrel helps it develop, whereas the white wines, we're trying to preserve those aromatics and those flavors. And so that's, once again, this is a stylistic choice. You can do it in many different ways, but that is how we do it here. So that's why we hold our white wines in stainless steel, and we age our red wine in barrel anywhere from 7 to 9 to 15 months in the barrel. For instance, Ratio Rosso you're having actually every year has only a year in the barrel. But yeah.
Yeah, and if you're ever at home and you cut an apple open and you leave it on the counter, it kind of starts to get brown. That's basically oxidation occurring, and the same thing is happening with wines, especially reds. When you open it exposed to oxygen, you get basically a release of aromatics, and the flavor really starts to release. So if you have, for example, a wine that is meant to be aged for a long period of time, and it's kind of a young red wine, for example, if you had a Cabernet Sauvignon that could be aged for 10 years and you really wanted to enjoy the full effect of it, what I would actually recommend is opening that bottle of Cab, putting the cork back on it and aerating it for about anywhere between 3 to 24 hours, and then the next day it's going to taste totally different.
That's typically what I do with my reds.
It
helps.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's oh yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Pro
Sorry.
tip.
Oh no, just a small comment. I was just gonna say that's something I encourage in the tasting room is after you take those first couple of sips and you experience the wine, if you just let the wine sit in your glass and oxidize a little bit, that actually will bring a whole new effect into the wine. So it's kind of fun to try. That's why people play with aerators and decanters. But
Gotcha. We're getting some great questions, so thank you everyone who's tuning in from home. We want to get through as many of these as we can. Hey, Awesome Llama here, and if I'm not mistaken, Awesome Llama was the winner of our trivia contest, so congratulations to you, Awesome Llama. Well done. Are there particular types of white grapes used to make orange wines?
So actually, that's a great question. You can make orange wine with any white wine out there. Orange wine is the popular name, but it's a skin fermented white wine. The main difference you're going to get is actually the color spectrum, because every grape produces different flavors. That's something known about wine. But when it comes to orange wine, great examples are like our orange Viognier. They're not that susceptible to sunlight. They don't produce much pigment, so they don't bring much color in the first place. Whereas a grape like Pinot Grigio, that's going to bring a lot of color. It's very susceptible. It's going to produce a really dark orange effect. So the color spectrum is the biggest difference you're going to have between different grape varietals when you're using different white wines to make orange wine. So that's what I'd say for that.
Well, thank you. We've got a question here. I know you touched on it earlier. Why is the name of the winery 11?
Yeah.
Yes, well, I have to say that is one of our favorite questions in the tasting room.
You answer it all the time.
Yeah. So Matt Albee, who you saw at the beginning of the presentation, he is the owner and winemaker of 11. And back in the day, he was a professional bike racer. And so when you're giving it your all at the end of the race and you want to win and you gotta push everything you got, pedal to the metal, you actually have to switch to the 11th gear.
No, the lowest gear.
11.
11?
No, they call it the 11 because
You're right,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So there's 11 teeth on the smallest gear of a racing bike, and when you switch to that gear, that's where you're putting in all of your effort to win the race. And his whole concept was, okay, if I work this hard in bike racing, we're just going to apply that to winemaking, and that's why we're the best on Bainbridge for the past 7 years in a row.
There you have it.
That's great. So a question here, what is, presumably when you're making wines, things don't always go according to plan. Have there ever been any particularly notable fails? Has there ever been something that's gone wrong?
Well, we
So actually, that's one of my favorite stories. We mentioned it earlier, but we have that wine, the white Mourvedre, and so that actually, not the whole process itself, that Bon Gris style, but that process actually, the whole wine itself for us began as an accident. So essentially, one year, due to the craziness of harvest season, our winemaker pulled Sauvignon some juice intended for the rosé a little bit early. And so he actually had this, and he realized it hadn't had enough time on the skins, that hadn't absorbed any color. And so he realized he basically had the situation to make a white wine. And he knew that there was this style of winemaking called Bon Gris. And so he just went with it. He wanted to ferment it out and see if it tasted great, which it did. And that was like 5 or 6 years ago. And so we've been, ever since then, due to just that happenstance and accident, every year we've been able to improve that more and more. And it's become one of our wine club members' favorites. In fact, in our club party speeches, our winemaker will say how that's one of his favorite white wines to drink, just because it's a little fuller bodied, more on the melon and cantaloupe end of the spectrum as far as the taste goes. So that's a happy accident.
Yeah,
Yes.
happy accident.
Yeah, so sometimes there are going to be those happy accidents. And one of the things I just want to highlight again in relation to Mourvedre is back in 2017, we had some fires on the east side where the smoke actually blew over the vineyards.
This is what it looks. This is that bottle.
That's the 17 Mourvedre, yeah. And so this vintage in particular is very bourbon-esque, and it's smoky because the grapes absorbed the smoke from the fires at that time. But yeah, sorry, we got carried away with that.
We got excited.
We got excited.
Yeah. Well, it's always lovely when a negative turns into a positive. We got some lovely wines. So speaking of which, Jonathan asks, what's your favorite wine produced by 11? Or what's the first thing you would recommend?
It depends on the day.
Yeah, I will say, like, days and seasons are a big effect, but also year after year, because every vintage year will change which are my favorite wines. Like, speaking personally, and I think actually some of us agree on this one, I think it's one of the best years of Sauvignon Blanc, our La Donella, that we've ever produced. So I'm very excited about that one. But also that unique chilled Petit Verdot blend, La Diavola. That one,
She-Devil.
the She-Devil. I heard a new adjective recently. It was devilicious. So it's so good, and it's really worth trying. I don't think a lot of people have had wines that are quite like that one.
We have some pretty unique wines here that I think across boards are really satisfactory to a lot of people. I think it's hard, at least for me, but I'm going to speak for the two of you. It's hard to pick a favorite of the wine that we have here. We're lucky enough to be able to drink it all the time. But I think with wine, it totally depends on the time of day or what you're eating or how you're feeling. My favorite is different today versus tomorrow.
With that being said, I will say that I am with you two on that, but we actually produce something called, we've been talking a lot about Viognier and how versatile it is. We produce something called the Syrah Prima Donna, which is a Syrah co-fermented with Viognier. So that means the skins of both grapes were fermenting at the same time. And like I mentioned earlier, Syrah is a Washington State, is what we're known for in Washington State. So I'm a huge Syrah fan. But these two are right there. We have good stuff.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
And I guess that's a good point. Like, a time-tested varietal for myself has always been our Tempranillo. Tempranillo is probably, if I had to choose one, is my favorite grape in the world. And so we produce a really nice one here. So I really enjoy our Tempranillo, which typically is a club wine. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I can't even choose one.
Yeah.
Right now. I don't know.
I assume you
I
get
like them all. I like them all.
They're all good. I assume you get asked this question a lot. I mean, are there any common, you probably get asked a lot of common questions, but are there any common misconceptions that people have about the wine industry, about enjoying wines and vineyards and wineries? Yeah.
Talia, what do you think?
Well, I just feel like a lot of people, at least in my experience, I'll be in the tasting room and they'll come in and be like, this tastes like this to me, but I don't listen to me. I don't know because I'm not an expert in winemaking. You know more than me. And I'm like, look, like, wine again is it's for everybody across the board. It's an experience that everybody should have. And that wine tasting isn't for somebody that knows all the information that you could know. The best way to understand wine or the flavors is by experiencing it. So I feel like the biggest misconception is that it's wine or wine tasting is for experts, or it's some just high-end experience. But when it's really just like, if you enjoy it and if that's something that makes you happy, it helps elevate both just a wine drinking experience, but also a culinary experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, here at 11, our staff is a little bit younger, but we're pretty knowledgeable of our own wines, and everything is about making everybody feel comfortable and invited. And it's honestly all just about having fun. So we do have a decent knowledge about wine. It's kind of up to the individual person as to where they want to begin their journey.
Well, you're all clearly passionate about what you do. So what got you three interested in pursuing a career in vineyards? Oh, sorry, not in vineyards. Sorry, in winemaking and winery. How did you get to where you are today?
Well, so I can say for myself at least, I came out of college. I have an conservation biology background, and so while I have always been science-minded, I just got into this as a job after college. I thought it would be fun, and in fact, it was so much fun. I talked about wine so much that I had to try making it, and so ever since then, I've been kind of hooked, because it's a blend of what I've practiced for years, yet a whole new world. Like I said, wine is infinite. And so it's really just intrigued me, and I think just on this introduction, I can go very far with it. So that's what brought me into it. But
my parents are big winos; they love wine. I grew up on Bainbridge Island, so we would a lot of the time we would take family trips out to Lake Chelan or Eastern Washington, where we would just do like camping trips and stuff. But we'd always stop at different wineries, and my parents would do the tasting, and I'm under 21 at this point, so obviously I'm not drinking, but I'd be standing with them and they would let me smell the wine. And I vividly remember being like, wow, like that's so incredible. I can smell green apples in this white wine. Like, why is this? This is made out of grapes. And that's kind of where it sparked my interest. But then in college, two of my best friends, one of my roommates worked at a winery, so I was exposed to it. And then I moved to Italy and drank wine every day. So I mean,
Wow.
I've just been around. I don't know. It's just something. It just kind of happened for me, and I feel really lucky to be able to work in an industry that I love. I think it's a beautiful art process, and it tastes fantastic.
Awesome story. So no, seriously. So I actually have a similar background to Forrest. My degree is in aquatic and fishery sciences, and I moved to the island to take a marine restoration job. That was part-time, and in the meantime, I was like, okay, well, what's another thing I can do on Bainbridge to earn some money? And I was like, oh, well, Bainbridge, 11 Winery is hiring. So I reached out, and I quickly realized that, there's as much science in winemaking as there is in marine restoration. So I hopped on the 11 bandwagon, and
been here ever since.
So gotta enjoy good wine. You gotta drink at 11.
Great wine fun.
Great wine fun.
Great wine fun.
We've got a couple of questions from our trivia champion, Lama. What is the ABV range for wine? I mean, you discussed this that you had that 180 wine, but what's
so essentially that is something that if you want a rough equation, the sugar that's converted through fermentation is going to lead to more alcohol. So the more sugar you have, the more alcohol you have. But that is something that is manageable in wineries. For instance, here at 11, we aim for lower alcohol wines. So we want ours to be typically in the 12 to 14 range, which most of our wines are, except for our dessert wines, deliberately. But it can be anywhere on the low range from 9 to 10, upwards of, I've seen blackberry wines that, like other fruit wines, that will go much above 16%, like almost to 20%. So really from about 9 to 20 is a general ballpark I would give for the ABV of wine. And just to explain a bit more, for our dessert wines, they're fortified, they're port style dessert wines. There's a direct addition of high proof alcohol, or same alcohol as our hand sanitizer, so that affects that. So there's a few ways to answer that question, but generally 9 to 20, let's say 9 to 20%.
Yeah.
So will you? So the question also goes on to say, like, do you shoot for a particular percentage? Do you think,
Right.
this wine would be best within this range?
It's not yeah, so essentially there's two prongs to that question or that answer. So one, we do want to aim for, like, our winemaker wants to aim for lower alcohol wine. So he really wants to aim for that 12 to 14 really thin ballpark right there. But that also brings us back to harvest decision. Where are your bricks at or your sugar units at when you're harvesting, because that's what you're going to work with. And it is manageable. You can affect how much alcohol you're going to produce or leave in your wine. But that really does bring us back to more of the stylistic choice of the winemaker. Like, the winemaker has so much control for the alcohol of the wine once he brings it in. It's not so much the fruit itself. So most winemakers will have a certain goal, and ours here is about 12 to 14%.
Yeah, and if you wait a little bit too long and you're aiming for a higher sugar content, you're actually going to lose the acidity and the freshness of the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes back to Matt's decision of picking random grapes along the vines and when they all taste the best. Because even though some winemakers will pick based off of sugar content, we're more focused on whether or not the fruit is actually fully representing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then that'll be true in the wine as well. So we're very attentive to the quality of the grapes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Speaking of alcohol content, we're going to need to wrap things up soon. We're going to have 2 more questions before I totally fall off the trolley. So we've got a question here from the audience that asks, if you could visit any winery other than your own in Washington State, where would it be? Do you have any other local faves, or maybe even anywhere in the world? If you could go to a winery anywhere, where would it be?
You're saying anywhere in the world or in Washington State?
Well, how about both? You give me one of each. How about that?
Okay.
In Washington State, I had a friend that was a winemaker at Sleight of Hand in Walla Walla. So I have never been able to visit where she had worked. So I would love to get the opportunity to go there. And that's in Walla Walla, Washington. But I think in the world, I don't know, personally, somewhere in Italy, I would love to go to the Valpolicella region, which is by Verona or Venice, and just drink some Northern Italian wine. That's where I'd like to go.
Yeah, I'd say I don't know so much specific wineries as far as regions. I know I just want to go and just roam all around. So like here in Washington, Lake Chelan has they have their own AVA, and it's about to be, I think, 2 different AVAs because they're doing it French style and splitting it across the lake. But so Lake Chelan and then the Heart of Washington Wine in Walla Walla are 2 places I have yet to really experience that I want to go. And then for myself, I'm fascinated by Spanish wines. So there's a few different Rioja areas like Rioja Alto and a few others. And so I want to go experience more in depth because I've been before, but I want to go more in depth on Spanish wine. But I do have also interest in Italian wines, like the Piedmont region I've heard is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and not to give California too much credit, but I have a friend in California who owns a winery called Turkovich Family Wines, and they actually produce some of the same varietals that we do here at 11. And it's always super fun to go to different wineries and try the same grape or the same style between wineries and compare.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much. Got time for one more question. Given that we're live on PacSci's YouTube channel right now, and that we've got this platform, is there anything that you would like to share with our community at this time before we head off?
Yes, there's 2 things. We want to talk about our philanthropy, and we also want to discuss our she-devil just real quickly here.
Just the she-devil.
So this is something we produce every summer. It's called the La Diavola, and it's a red wine that we chill, and it's 95% Petit Verdot and 5% Syrah. So it's got this really dark, lush color to it, but a nice, sweet and bold finish. And I think Natalia wanted to mention the philanthropic things that we're doing.
Yeah,
well.
So
philanthropic, excuse me. Yeah,
Friday is Juneteenth. I'm sure a lot of you know. So on Friday, actually, we're going to be donating 50% of all of our proceeds from the tasting room and as well as our online sales to the Movement for Black Lives. So if you are interested, and I hope you are, that we would love to have you in our tasting rooms or order some wine online on June 19th. So this is this Friday, Juneteenth. we're going to be donating, again, 50% of our proceeds. So it's just something that really matters to us and to the community. And it's just something we wanted to put out there.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, to support the Pacific Science Center, you know, if you guys want to purchase the virtual happy hour bottles that you know had today, or for those of you out there that haven't had the opportunity, we would love to support PacSci. So please, you know, purchase a kit of the tandem bike set and you know, support science and curiosity. We would love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much. Support your local winery, support the Science Center. And of course, come by the winery on Friday, and 50% of the proceeds will go to the Black Lives Matter movement. That's superb. Well, I got to say thank you to Stephen, Natalia, and Forrest for sharing your time and expertise with all of us today. We really appreciate you.
Of course.
Cheers.
Thank you for having
Cheers,
us.
everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
A big thank you to 11 Winery for partnering with us. We really appreciate you. Thank you to our partners, First Tech Federal Credit Union, for supporting the Science Center as well. And of course, thank you to everybody who is watching from home and joining us. And thank you for all your thoughtful questions. We appreciate you connecting with us in times like this. We hope you've enjoyed tonight's event. Please fill out the brief survey. I think we were going to put that in the comments section. It's in our description. We're also going to email it to you. So there's all sorts of ways that you can let us know how tonight's event went. We always love to hear from you and connect with you and hear how we can continue to improve events like this. And remember to help us ensure that curiosity never closes by donating to the Pacific Science Center at pacsci.org/support. So thank you, everyone. It's been a great event, and we look forward to connecting with everyone soon. So bye for now.
Thank you. Have a good
Bye,
night.
David. Thank you.